Good afternoon, everyone, and s prazdnikom, happy Feast of Pentecost. My name is Christopher Spiro, and welcome to the Treasures of Synod. We'd like to thank Bishop Nicholas, the Cathedral Warden Sergei Akushin, and the Cherubim Foundation for making this afternoon's event possible. So, although I had the occasion to visit Synod as a child, I did not become a regular parishioner until after graduating college, which is over 10 years ago. In fact, it's going on closer to 2 decades. So this presentation is based on my research. There's a lot of input that I received from active parishioners who've been involved for decades, really since the beginning of this institution. And some of the material is not very well documented. So our history is also an oral history, which means sometimes there is conflicting information. So just be aware of that if you've heard something slightly different. But there are so many ways in which this building is a great treasury. And the building itself is actually a treasure. It is an architectural gem of New York City. It is a landmark building, and it goes by many names. Of course, in the church, we commonly know it as Synod, or as the headquarters of the Synod of Bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. It's also known as the Semenenko Memorial. It's also known as the George F. Baker Jr. Mansion, and in some sources, it's referred to as the Francis F. Palmer House. So many names, one building, and we'll talk about the significance of each of those titles. So the building was not purpose-built as a church. Most of you probably are aware of that. It was built as a private home in 1917. Some sources say that the building was completed in 1918 for a banker named Francis F. Palmer. So that's where we get sometimes a reference to the building as the Francis F. Palmer home. This is a picture of the home after it was completed around 1918. And the architectural firm that was hired to complete the building was Delano and Aldrich. Delano and Aldrich were known architects on the East Coast. And the building is built in Neo-Federalist style, in brick, with various neoclassical decorations. This was kind of a signature look for buildings by Delano and Aldrich. Besides Synod, they also designed and built the Knickerbocker Club, an exclusive men's club on Fifth Avenue at the corner of 62nd Street. And you can see a lot of similarities to the Synod building. And as I discovered, some of the interior is kind of similar. This is the interior of Synod, the staircase, and this is a staircase in the Knickerbocker Club. So in 1926, Francis F. Palmer sold the home to George F. Baker Jr., who was also a banker, and he expanded the home over the course of the decade of the 1920s. And according to some sources, George F. Baker Jr. was an avid sailor. And so you have a lot of nautical themes as part of the decoration of some of the extensions on the building, including here, you see above the glass doors are these shells. And above this door, this is the door from the courtyard into the current lobby. And note the image above the door, that is the head of Medusa. So a very unusual motif in a building that is designated as a church sanctuary. So the question is, how did it finally get its final name, the Synod of Bishops? This brings us back to the history of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. For those of you who don't know, it was founded as a jurisdiction in 1920, actually on a ship in the port of Constantinople, by a group of Russian bishops and emigres who wanted to preserve the church free of communist infiltration after the Russian Revolution. The location of the headquarters for the Russian Church abroad moved over the course of the first half of the 20th century. It was in Sremski Karlovci in Serbia for a while, and then in Munich for a brief amount of time. Finally, it moved to the United States. It was in this town of Mahopac, upstate New York, and then on West 77th Street here in New York City. And a member of the church abroad felt that a larger and grander headquarters was necessary for the Russian church outside of Russia. And this man's name was Sergei Semenenko. Sergei Semenenko worked his way up in the First National Bank of Boston, and through another member of the church abroad, Mikhail Sherbinin, he met Edith Baker. Edith Baker was the widow of George F. Baker Jr., and she had held on to this home into the 1950s, but she wasn't using most of it. In fact, she was living on the other side of the courtyard, which had been built as the garage originally for this home. This picture of Sergei Semenenko is with the American actress Dolores Hart, and through him, the Synod building was acquired from Edith Baker. He financed the complete repurposing of the building for its sacred purpose today. So there are administrative offices, residences for clergy. There are church halls such as this for lunch and, of course, lectures. And two sanctuaries, the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Sign and the so-called Lower Temple Nizhny Chram, the Chapel of St. Sergius. So let's head on into the building. We'll go in from the ground floor. Some of you are probably familiar with some of the information we'll be discussing today. Some of you may have had tours of the church as well. But hopefully you'll learn a little something new. I learned a few new things last minute, the past 2 weeks actually, as I was putting this presentation together. So in the foyer, I've heard that it's the best acoustics in the house. So occasionally there's an impromptu choir practice. This dates back a couple years ago. The singer on the left is, of course, our dearly departed friend, Isaiah Trofimenko. So before we head into the sanctuaries, let's go from the very bottom of the building to the top. And to do that, we'll take the elevator. Now, for those of you who've had the harrowing experience of riding in our elevator, you'll note that there is a B for basement, and then there is an SB, which is in reference to sub-basement. It actually was not built as a basement. In fact, it was built as a entrance to a private train car. And this is one of the few private homes in New York City with a purpose-built train entrance. According to my research, it's very hard to determine whether it was actually used. We know that the first and second owner had homes in Tuxedo Park, which probably would have been the route they would have taken with this train. It's not very glamorous today, but it is an interesting and unique part of this building's history. And then let's go all the way to the top. The 5th floor, you'll be able to get on the roof and see our bells. We rarely use the bells today, but occasionally they are rung for special occasions. And there's also a rooftop patio, which had previously been used over the years, especially from Easter and then over the summer for barbecues and different outdoor events. This is the view from the rooftop patio looking westward, and this is a view looking eastward down at Park Avenue. So when you come into the building from the ground floor, you'll be greeted on the right by the receptionist, and on the left by this portrait of Vladika Anastasi, who was the second Metropolitan of the Russian Church abroad. We'll head up the stairs, and then we will finally head into the main sanctuary. So the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Sign is currently located in what had been the ballroom when this was a private home. And according to some sources, this alcove that we pass through is where the orchestra would play during these festive balls. And if you attend services on Sunday, you may be greeted by either Martha or Amelia. Let's enter the other way into the cathedral, which is through the courtyard. The courtyard has been used in many film productions, including the hit television series Gossip Girl. You head up the stairs here and enter through the glass doors, as shown in this picture of our previous Metropolitan, Vladika Hilarion, who passed away in 2022. And speaking of the Metropolitan, it is the cathedral of the Metropolitan of the Russian Church outside of Russia. So this is the seat of the Metropolitan. The cathedral is used on Sundays for liturgy, Saturday evenings for vigils, and for various feast days and commemorations, including the Feast of Transfiguration coming up in August, and services such as the Good Friday Lamentations. Let's take a look at the iconostasis. The iconostasis was purpose-built for this cathedral. It was painted or written, as it's sometimes referred to when artists, when iconographers create icons, written or painted by Archimandrite Kiprian Pijov, who was a prominent iconographer in the Russian diaspora. It was painted as the cathedral was completed, the repurposing of this building in 1958. And if we look up above the iconostasis, we see a dome. A dome represents God coming down to us. And if we look closer, the image in this particular dome is Christ Emmanuel, which is Christ depicted as a youth. And he is seated on a throne of these angelic beings, including the Ophanim, which are these wheel-shaped beings with wings. And then the sixth wing, cherubim and seraphim. According to different biblical sources and the church fathers, the cherubim and seraphim both had 6 wings, sometimes because of the name seraphim, which refers to fiery. The seraphim are often depicted in red, whereas cherubim are sometimes in other colors. But it's often hard to tell from any given particular icon. But keep in mind that these images are really what the cherubim are supposed to look like. So the iconostasis in the cathedral has 3 tiers. Of course, there is always the royal doors in the center. Then you have, always on the right is Christ, the left is the Virgin Mary. This iconostasis has 3 tiers, the second being the 12 great feast days. And the third tier depicts in the center an image known as the Deesis, which is Christ flanked by St. John the Baptist and the Virgin Mary on the left. The Deesis range are the 12 apostles. And if we look down close to the iconostasis, we see these 2 boxes. These contain, on the right, a stone from the place where Jesus was crucified, Golgotha. And on the left is a piece of stone from the tomb of the Virgin Mary in Gethsemane. So the cathedral is dedicated to Our Lady of the Sign. This is also known as the Kursk icon. This is our current metropolitan in front of a kilt or small shrine. There are two large kilts in the cathedral. On the left is where Our Lady of the Sign is kept. It travels quite frequently, but it always is back on December 10th for the patronal feast of the cathedral. So the icon dates back to the 13th century, and it is currently shown in this cover. This particular cloth or decorative cover is gilt silver with enameling, and it dates to the 19th century. On the iconostasis at the very right is this image, which shows the Kursk icon and scenes from the history of the icon. So if we look closer, the image is the type or pose of the Virgin Mary, known as of the sign, with her arms outstretched in prayer, and the sign, which is Christ, is in the center. She is surrounded by various Old Testament prophets who foretold the coming of the Savior, including the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Elijah, and King David. The scenes of the history of the icon begin with the finding of the Kursk icon, which was mysteriously found by the root of a tree outside the city of Kursk in the 13th century. This scene depicts the Tatar invasion and a Tatar soldier who sliced the icon in half. Afterwards, it miraculously fused together. This image depicts an attempt by a group of communist revolutionaries to destroy the icon by blowing up the church in which it was housed. However, the icon remained unscathed. And after the revolution, of course, with great effort, it was brought out of Russia, and it was first housed in Serbia, which again was the headquarters of the Russian Church abroad for a period of time. And then finally, it was deposited here at Synod. So this is a very stylized image of our courtyard, in the background being the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building. And the egg in the back is inspired by this particular image on the icon. So the Kursk icon is well known in art history circles because of this painting. This is a painting known as a procession in the Kursk region. It was painted in 1880 by Ilya Repin. And although the subject of the painting is, in a sense, the icon itself, it is not visible because the icon is carried in this small shrine. And the painting is well known because it's considered to be a commentary on Russian society in the late 19th century. You have people from all different classes of society sort of forging along into the future in this, along this very dusty path. So if we look to the left side of the church, which is the north wall, we have this icon, which depicts the new martyrs. The new martyrs is a term used in the Russian Orthodox Church to refer to those individuals who were killed for their faith during the communist era in the 20th century. So this is actually only a very small percentage of the new martyrs. It's estimated that there were millions of people who were either executed or sent to the gulags for their Christian faith. But these are some of the more known new martyrs. And then if we look on the north wall, this is the back of the kilt, which houses the icon of Our Lady of the Sign. And on the back here is a banner of St. Nicholas, which belonged to the 3rd Drozdovsky Regiment in the White Army. It is hermetically sealed. It was restored with great effort and sealed in this case. And this is on the right side of the church, the back of the kilt that houses an icon of St. Nicholas for the 2nd Regiment. And so moving along on the north wall is this icon of the wonder worker, St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco, who died in the 1960s. This is a photograph of him. The icon has a very small relic in it, and in the altar of the cathedral is this vestment, which belonged to St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. So further along, as you can see, next to the icon of St. John is this icon, which depicts the saint whose relic is housed in this reliquary. It is Saint Elizabeth, the Grand Duchess of Russia. So for those of you who are not familiar with her, I think it's worthwhile to explore her life a little bit. Saint Elizabeth was born as a princess of Hesse-Darmstadt, which was a German royal family. In the late 19th century, she married Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich of Russia. So this is a painting, this is a photograph, it's actually signed by Elizabeth, of the newlywed couple. So she went from being a German princess to a Russian Grand Duchess. So this is her in the court costume of Imperial Russia. She was not required to convert. She had been raised, of course, as a Lutheran, but through a great deal of reflection and study, she chose to become Orthodox. In 1905, her husband was assassinated in an earlier attempt at a revolution before the revolution of 1917. And after that, she decided to become a nun. And here she is in the habit that she designed. And this photograph was sent to one of her sisters. And you can see she wrote in English, as her family often used English, your loving old sister, Ella. And so not only was she a sister, but she was a religious sister as well at this point. She founds the Martha Mariinsky Monastery, the Martha and Mary Convent in Moscow, and there she sets up a hospital, and she administers to the sick, the suffering, and to orphans. That didn't last very long, because after the Russian Revolution, the convent and hospital were forced to close. She was arrested, and she was actually buried alive. She was thrown down a mine shaft, as is depicted in this painting. The White Army found her body not long afterwards, because this was during the Russian Civil War, and her body was eventually brought to Jerusalem. It currently lies in St. Mary Magdalene Church, which is a church that belongs to the Russian Church abroad in Jerusalem. But as this is the cathedral of the Russian Church outside of Russia, her arm was brought here and is in this reliquary in the cathedral. So moving along on the north wall, we have St. Xenia of St. Petersburg, and you have a lovely detail of the ships of St. Petersburg and St. Isaac's Cathedral as it appeared in the late 19th century. In fact, St. Xenia was glorified not in Russia, but here at Synod in the 1970s. Her grave was opened up in 1986, and beneath her icon is this reliquary containing some earth and other objects that were found when her grave was opened. Next, we have St. John of Kronstadt, who was a priest of the late 19th, early 20th century in in Russia, as well as a theologian who wrote the book, My Life in Christ. Beneath the icon is his vyasa, one of his vestments. There's also an icon of the spiritual daughter of St. John of Kronstadt, St. Matrona of Moscow, who was born actually without eyes. Then we move along on the north wall. Up here is an icon which depicts the exaltation of the cross. This is when St. Helen, who was the mother of Emperor Constantine, known as Yelena in Russian, traveled down to the Holy Land and found the hill where the Romans had crucified people. And they started digging and found many crosses. Because there were so many crosses, a blind person was brought forward, and that blind person touched each of the crosses. And when that blind person miraculously was able to see again, that was a determination that it was the true cross. There are small relics of the true cross throughout the world, and there is one here. So in this cross is this little window, and in this window is a relic of the true cross. This cross is currently hanging in the altar. It is brought out only a few times during the year, including the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, which is in September, and the third Sunday of Lent, which is dedicated to the cross. So, Synod has a lot of icons that are not always on view for veneration, but are only brought out on the feast days associated with that particular sacred object. So I just wanted to include this. If any of you remember my last presentation, this is an icon of St. Nicholas of Japan that I've only seen brought out on the feast of St. Nicholas of Japan, which is in February, and the name day of our current metropolitan. The inscription, of course, being in Slavonic as well as in Japanese. So further along is this icon, and many people have asked me about this one, and I didn't know a whole lot about its history. It's kind of an unusual image of the Virgin Mary with Christ, with this Niello silver covering. It says, in memory of Dr. Anka and Dr. Ivan Subotic. And so I did a little research, and we flipped the icon over, and there is this inscription in Russian, which is hard to read, but it says, to the Governor General D.I. Subotic from Khabarovsk, 1903. So D.I. Subotic is Dejan Ivanovich Subotic, who was a Serbian military general who studied in Russia and was appointed to various high-level positions in the Russian Tsarist military. And he was, in 1903, promoted to the Governor General of the Amur region in eastern Russia, and later also to the very large area that was known as Russian Turkestan. So apparently Dr. Ivan Subotic was his nephew, who somehow gained possession of this icon, and after his nephew Ivan and Ivan's wife Anka died, we received this icon as a donation. So on the back of the north wall is this quite monumental image. This is All Saints of Russia. A lot of the saints from all different cities and regions and eras throughout Russian history. Of course, in the middle is Vladimir of Kiev, who is considered the baptizer of the Rus, who established the Orthodox faith as the faith of the Russian people in 988 AD. To his left is Saint Olga, his grandmother, who was in fact the first Russian ruler to become Christian out of Slavic paganism. This image is rather unusual because in the left corner you have these individuals that are depicted without halos. That is because these are a few of the new martyrs, and they had not yet been officially glorified, but they were understood already to be in the company of the saints. So this icon was created likely in the late 1940s, early 1950s. So here are some of the new martyrs. This is, again, quite a monumental image. It includes some lesser known saints, such as these three child saints of Russia. This is Saint Vasily of Ryazan, who was known to float on his vestment from the city of Murom down to Ryazan. And of course, some of the more known Russian saints, such as Alexander Nevsky on horseback, and Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who is depicted here praying on a rock, which he did for 1,000 days straight. And we're going to come back to Saint Seraphim's life and that very rock. So on the west wall, which is exactly opposite the iconostasis, is this vestment, which belonged to this saint. This is Saint Tikhon. Saint Tikhon actually served as the Bishop of New York before the Russian Revolution. At the time of the revolution, there was an election of a new Patriarch of Moscow, and he was elected. He returned to Moscow, and then after the Bolsheviks took over, he spoke out against what the government was doing, and so they killed him. And he is a new martyr. This is one of our icons of Saint Tikhon, and again with a very small relic in the corner. Now, the church at which Saint Tikhon served, you might recognize. It is St. Nicholas Cathedral on 97th Street between 5th Avenue and Madison Avenue. And this block, with great effort, received a special designation in 2022, which is St. Tikhon Way. And here is our priest, Father Andre, in attendance at the event. Also on the west wall is this image. It is a copy of the Vladimirskaya icon of the Mother of God. The original Vladimirskaya icon is located in Moscow. It's one of the oldest icons in Russia, dating likely to the 12th century. This copy was given to us upon the reunification of the Russian Church abroad with the Church in Russia. So now we're going to go up the right side of the church from the back toward the iconostasis. So this is the south side of the cathedral. Here we have a cross which belonged to the saint depicted here. It is the cross of Saint Seraphim. And this icon is quite remarkable. If we look at the back of this icon, it's a rough-hewn stone, and that is because it is painted on that very stone which Saint Seraphim prayed on for 1,000 days straight. The Russian royal family, the last Tsar Nicholas and his wife and children, were particularly dedicated to the veneration of Saint Seraphim. And most of you probably know that after the Russian Revolution, Tsar Nicholas, his wife, and 5 children were taken into captivity. They were ultimately brought to a building called the Ipatiev House, which is in Yekaterinburg in Siberia, where they were killed. Their bodies were cut into pieces and covered in sulfuric acid and placed in a unmarked grave. And the White Army arrived a couple months later. As I said, this was during the Russian Civil War, and they were not able at that time to locate the bodies, but they knew something had happened because in the Ipatiev house there was blood splatter on the walls, bullet holes, and in the rubble they found this very icon. So this very icon was a possession of the royal family that they had with them up until their murder. This was actually not the only icon that was found in the Ipatiev house. There was a group of 5 other icons. Now this case, which houses these 5 other icons from the Ipatiev house, used to hang on the north wall. It's currently hanging in the altar. And I did a little research and found something kind of interesting related to the icon in the center. So this one icon from Ipatiev house is of a rather obscure Siberian saint, Saint Simeon of Verkhoturye, who was an individual who lived in the 17th century. And he was particularly venerated by this individual, which you might recognize as Rasputin, the controversial mystic of the early 20th century. And according to Rasputin's own account, he was not a very religious person as a young man, but he suffered severe insomnia. And since he lived in a village in Siberia, he visited the relics of Saint Simeon of Verkhoturye, and he was healed. And so he credited this Saint Simeon with his path to a spiritual life. And he met, so Rasputin met Tsar Nicholas, we know, in October of 1906. And shortly after that visit, Tsar Nicholas sent a letter to Pyotr Arkadyevich Stolypin, who was an important statesman. And Tsar Nicholas wrote, Pyotr Arkadyevich, a few days ago, I received a peasant from the Tobolsk district, Grigory Rasputin, who brought me an icon of Saint Simeon of Verkhoturye. He made a remarkably strong impression both on Her Majesty and me, so that instead of 5 minutes, our conversation lasted more than an hour. So, is this very icon the icon that Rasputin gave to Tsar Nicholas when they first met? We can't really be certain. So further along on the south wall is this icon of the True Cross with Emperor Constantine, the first Roman emperor to legalize Christianity and become a Christian himself, and his mother, Saint Helen. Icons can be made in a variety of media. The most common, of course, are painted icons. There are mosaic icons, and then there are stitched icons. So this is a needlepoint icon. Further along on the south wall, you will see these 2 standards. They are historical standards. The one belonged to the White Army, and the other one was for the Tsar's regiment. So apparently in the 19th century and early 20th century, the Tsar was the general of the army, and rather than to hide him when he was actually in battle, there was a special standard flown. And so in here is that standard. As we progress, we find this family icon. So a family icon is an icon which depicts all of the saints after which members of a particular family are named. So it can include saints from different times and places that don't necessarily have any connection to one another, except as the patrons of that family. So in this case, it is the family icon of Sergei Semenenko, who donated this building. So his parents were named James and Maria. So this is St. James and Mary Magdalene. He was named in honor of St. Sergius of Radonesh. And his brother was named Nicholas, his sister was named Yelena, and his daughter was named Christina. Further along is this charming icon depicting the protecting veil of the Mother of God. This icon was also painted by Kyprian Pijov, who painted the iconostasis of Synod. And beneath this icon is a reliquary containing many small relics of various saints from the Kiev Caves Monastery. This is a rather unusual icon depicting 3 members of the royal family who were also murdered along with Saint Elizabeth in that mine shaft. And then we come to the kiot on the right side of the church. It is, in fact, a small shrine dedicated as a family shrine for the royal family. So once again, the family icons, Tsar Nicholas named in honor of the original Saint Nicholas of Byzantium, Bishop of Myra, the inspiration for Santa Claus. And above you have Saint Alexandra, the name saints of his daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and their son Alexei, named in honor of Saint Alexei of Moscow. And beneath the image of Saint Nicholas is the coronation mantle. And this was worn by Tsar Nicholas at the last coronation in Russian history. It remains in this church with great effort. And the royal family themselves were glorified as saints. That glorification took place here in New York City at Synod in 1981. So now they have been revealed as saints as well. This icon kind of depicts the royal family in a default Byzantine fashion, but it is an interesting question for iconographers who are tasked with creating icons of modern saints who often have many photographs of them in terms of accuracy of the faces, as well as the question of whether they should be depicted in the type of clothing that they actually wore. So in front of the kiot of St. Nicholas is this group of icons. These all belong to a parishioner here at Synod, Yelena Nikiforovna Volkonskaya. Mrs. Volkonsky was a longtime parishioner. She was a classical pianist and a teacher at Juilliard, and she would often arrange musical concerts of her former students in this very hall. She died in 2015, and after that, her daughter donated these icons, and they have been placed right in the front of the St. Nicholas kiot, which is where Mrs. Volkonsky used to stand when she attended church. And above is this icon. This icon is depicting Saint Thecla. Saint Thecla was a follower of Saint Paul. Her tomb is in Ma'alula, Syria. And as you can see, the inscription is also in Arabic. According to the oral tradition of Synod, this icon was owned by a woman and kept in her house. And then she frequently received visions of Saint Thecla in dreams, telling her to donate the icon to a church. And that's how we received it. And before we head out, there is this charming icon which illustrates a special connection that this church has with Saint Seraphim. This icon depicts Saint Seraphim as a child. He was very sick around the age of 8, and his mother brought him to Kurs to venerate the Kurs icon. And he was healed and credited that experience with his decision to become a monk. So that is a special connection between Saint Seraphim and Our Lady of the Sign icon. And in the alcove, you will encounter this bust. It is a statue of Tsar Nicholas. Once again, according to oral tradition, this was created based on a stone bust, which was thrown into the Black Sea after the revolution. It washed ashore in the 1990s after the collapse of communism, and all of the facial features were intact. So this was recreated in bronze and donated to the Synod with the 100-year memorial of the murder of the royal family in 2018. So before we head to the sanctuary downstairs, I think we'll stop by in this room. The church hall, also known as the Semenenko Hall. Of note are this image, which is right over here, the baptism of Rus when Saint Vladimir established the Orthodox faith as the religion of the Russian people in 988 AD. Also of note, above the doors there, are these neoclassical elements that come from Greco-Roman mythology, again because of the preference for neoclassical design elements in early 20th century home design. And if we were to go through that door into the room that is affectionately known as the Golitsyn room, we might encounter these living treasures. But I know everyone in New York is pressed for time, so let's continue along downstairs into the Nizhny Khram, the lower temple, Khram Prepodobного Sergeя Radonежского, the chapel of St. Sergius. So we head inside, and St. Sergius Chapel is actually composed of two adjoining rooms. When this was a private home, the front part of the chapel had been an early dining room, and the back room was a receiving room. And if you look to the right of my godson Adrian, you'll see this fireplace, again a very rare element in a church building. And the decoration here are putti, which are images from Greco-Roman mythology that were revived during the Renaissance. So sometimes these are referred to as cherubs, but in fact we've discussed what real cherubim are, and these are in fact the conventional artistic putti. To the right of the fireplace is a baptismal font. This one is really quite new. And then let's head into the front part of St. Sergius Chapel. The iconostasis, 2 tiers. Again, the royal doors. To the right is Christ, left is the Virgin Mary. The second tier are the 12 great feast days. This iconostasis was actually built for the previous headquarters of the Russian Church abroad on West 77th Street. It was painted by Bishop Daniel of Erie. And from what I've been told, in its original location, there was a 3rd tier, which could not be accommodated in its current location. And so the top tier had these icons, these tall icons with the sort of kokoshnik on the top, and they have been placed in various parts of the chapel, but they were originally part of the iconostasis. But what is not part of the iconostasis as it was built for the West 77th Street location are the royal doors. The royal doors are in fact from the lower church of the Fyodorovsky Sovereign Cathedral in Tsarskoye Selo. So this was one of Tsar Nicholas's favorite churches, and it was the official church of the Tsar's regiment. So this is a photograph of the regiment with Tsar Nicholas in front of the Fyodorovsky Cathedral, from which the royal doors come. They are painted with very high quality pigments created from various stones dating to the 17th century. At the top, of course, the image of the Annunciation. and the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Above the iconostasis is also a icon that was not created by the bishop who painted the rest of the iconostasis. This is even older. We don't really know its origins, but it does date to the 16th century. The quixote on the right in St. Sergius Chapel depicts St. Sergius, who was, again, the namesake of Sergei Semenenko, who donated this building, with scenes from his life. And on the left is the Harbin icon, Joy of All Who Sorrow. So the type or pose is Joy of All Who Sorrow. This icon comes from the city of Harbin in China. Harbin is in Manchuria, northeast China. It was a major center for Russian Orthodox Christianity because during the Tsarist era, the Manchurian Railway was being built by the Russians. So a lot of Russians came in at that point, and then after the revolution, many Russians fled eastward and settled in Harbin, and there were also many Albazinians who lived in Harbin. Albazinians are a subgroup of Chinese people who practiced Orthodox Christianity, and many of them lived in Harbin. So this is the Cathedral of Holy Wisdom in Harbin. It is quite an impressive building. Of course, after Mao's Cultural Revolution, it was taken by the Chinese Communist Party, and it was set for demolition at various points in history. However, it was determined that it could be a moneymaker as an important tourist site. So it's now like a museum of atheism. So although they left the original structure, all of the displays inside are not part of the original decoration. So the Harbin icon that is in St. Sergius Chapel is an example of a self-renewing icon. So it is believed to be hundreds of years old, and when a lady donated it to the church, it was much darker. The pigments were not very clear, and it miraculously brightened in a very short amount of time. So it's an example of a self-renewing icon. This is an icon in St. Sergius that was donated and is believed to be from the so-called Stroganov school of icon painting, which generally like this design where it would be a kind of a small image and then a very large frame. In this case, it is gilt wood. And St. Sergius is used for daily services, and then on Sundays and Saturday nights, it is used by the English-speaking parish, which is quite a diverse parish. And perhaps because of that, or as a coincidence, many icons have inscriptions in various languages and include saints from various parts of the world. This is Saint Ludmila of Bohemia, known as the grandmother of good King Wenceslas, the subject of the Christmas Carol. And you see the inscription is in Czech. This is an icon of Saint Jacob of Alaska, currently in the altar of St. Sergius Chapel. He was a native Unangan of the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. There are also many newly illumined saints that are depicted among the icons in St. Sergius, including Saint Gabriel Urgabadze, who is a saint newly glorified from Georgia, and with a small relic. And finally, Saint Olga of Alaska. Saint Olga was glorified last year. She was a native Yupik woman, and shortly after the glorification, Synod received this small relic of Saint Olga. There are very few relics of Saint Olga outside of her village in rural Alaska, which is where her tribe wished the relics to remain. So now we've looked at some of the visual treasures of Synod, but there are other treasures that are just as important in the church experience. These are the hymns and the music of the church, which serve to uplift the human spirit in its quest for God. So the hymnography of the Orthodox Church dates back millennia. Various hymnographers have contributed to the Orthodox liturgical tradition. The hymnographers are sometimes referred to as liturgical poets. They include such individuals as Saint Ephrem, the Syrian, who lived in the 4th century, Saint Romanos the Melodist, who lived in the 6th century, and Saint Cassiani of Constantinople, who lived in the 9th century. Saint Cassiani, also known as Cassia, is one of the few women hymnographers, but she is not the only one. There is a hymnographer with a special connection to the Synod, and that is Valeria ROCOR. ROCOR was born Valeria Konstantinovna Gubanova in the Russian Empire. Although her parents were from St. Petersburg, she grew up in the Caucasus, present-day Georgia, because of her father's work. And she was privately tutored in a variety of subjects, including foreign languages, music, and interestingly, theology. After the Russian Revolution, her family fled and ended up in Serbia. And in Serbia, she enrolled in the theology department of the University of Belgrade. And there she studied theology. And she commenced really a lifelong endeavor of creating hymns and services for the Orthodox Church. She married a man named Paul ROCOR, who was a German convert to Orthodox Christianity. He also studied at the theology department in the University of Belgrade. They married and he became a priest. They moved to Germany where he was a parish priest. After World War II, the area where they lived became East Germany. And so the communist Stasi arrested her husband as a priest, and he was sent to the gulags in the Soviet Union, where he died. And so with great effort and through the help of Americans, Valeria escaped with her children to West Germany and then made it to the United States, to New York, so that she could be close to the Synod of the Russian Church outside of Russia. About half of her hymns and services are dedicated to female saints, which include Saint Tamara of Georgia. This icon is located on the north wall at Synod, and Ksenia of St. Petersburg. And as I said, Saint Ksenia was glorified here in New York City at Synod, and Valeria Konstantinovna wrote the service for that glorification. Valeria Konstantinovna also wrote hymns to this saint, Saint Theophania, also known as Theophano of Constantinople. She was the wife of Emperor Leo VI of Byzantium, also known as Emperor Leo the Wise. And after she died, her husband believed her to be a saint and wanted to dedicate a church to her memory. But the church authorities felt it was too soon after his wife's death for her to be glorified in that way. And so he dedicated the church to All Saints, and he established the Feast of All Saints so that his wife could be included in that commemoration. And the Feast of All Saints will be observed next Sunday. It's always the first Sunday after Pentecost. So this is a hymn that Valeria ROCOR wrote in honor of Saint Theophania. And although Valeria followed the conventions of traditional Orthodox iconography, she also took a lot of creative liberties that really distinguish her work from a lot of the earlier hymns of the church. So she often would switch the voice, the perspective, the addressee in her hymns. So if we look at this hymn, the top is in so-called Russian Church Slavonic. The Tsar and your husband thought you to be holy, seeing your struggles and your blameless life. A desire burned in him at your end to raise up to you a temple, but having been detained, he erected a church to all saints. Behold, crying out, Theophania is holy. Let this church be in her honor too. So as you can see, the first part of the hymn is addressed to Theophania, but it is told through the lens of her husband. And then in the second part of the hymn, we have the voice of Leo the Wise himself crying out, Theophania is holy, let this church be in her honor too. And finally, we come to the musical tradition at Synod. So Synod generally uses the Moscow school of liturgical singing. Many of the composers are from the late 19th and 20th centuries. They include very well-known names such as Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, and Rimsky-Korsakov, but also some composers that specifically focused on church music, including Kostalsky, Grechaninov, and Chesnakov, as well as the works of Boris Likovsky. And Boris Likovsky has a special connection to Synod, and his music is a unique part of the Synod tradition. Boris Mikhailovich Likovsky was born 1894 in the Russian Empire. He studied musical composition, according to some sources, under Kostalsky in Moscow. He also served in the White Army. After the revolution, he fled and lived in various parts of Europe for the remainder of the first half of the 20th century, including in Bulgaria, where he served as the choir conductor of St. Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, which is the main cathedral in Sofia, the capital. Eventually, he makes his way to New York City, and he becomes the first choir conductor of Synod when Synod was established at this location in the 1950s. He also taught at St. Vladimir Seminary in Yonkers. This is a photo from the 1960s of the choir in procession back into the church during the Easter service. This is Boris Likovsky here with members of the choir. Over here, I believe, is his son Alexander, who became the second choir conductor of Synod after Boris Likovsky's passing. So Boris Likovsky's work, I would say, really touches sort of every emotion and really taps into the human soul with all of its complexities. So we're going to look now at a few pieces, and we'll make sure that this is on.
Battery 100%. Connected to iPhone and CMS.
So, of course, there are professional recordings of the works of Likovsky. The Synodal Choir has also done professional recordings, though I believe it's been over a decade. So I included some clips from videos of the music being sung at church, so you have a sense of what to encounter during a church service when you attend. So this will be a clip from part of the piece Neimami Imia Pomoshi, which is We Have No Other Help. It's a hymn dedicated to the Mother of God and is especially associated with the joy of all who sorrow icon. You will often hear it as a pre-communion hymn at Synod. I requested it to be sung at the conclusion of one of my father's memorials, and this clip was recorded during that memorial. And the solo part you will hear in the beginning is, once again, our dearly departed friend Isaiah. Okay, and now we're going to hear a joyous piece. This is a section of the Stichera of Pascha. This is a piece that is used throughout the Easter season. The words include the very uplifting words, O Pascha, ransom from sorrow, for from the tomb today, as from a bridal chamber, hath Christ shone forth, and hath filled the women with joy. This was recorded last month on Easter night. I would like to close with the words of Vladimir Kirilovich Golitsyn. Vladimir Kirilovich was the cathedral warden here at Synod for over 30 years. He passed away in 2018. And many years ago, when he was giving an interview, he spoke of the purpose of Synod and its legacy for much of his life. And he said, "It is important that there are now a multitude of believers who come to New York and without fear of repercussions can venerate the sacred objects of our synodal cathedral, the holy objects that appear to have been lost for the believers of Russia." Thank you very much.